Let's double down on Jessica Tarlov and Fox News The Five as they discuss the election and what it means, as I feel in the wake of losing, these make a pretty good way for me to jump in and explain my thoughts on what went wrong and how we can do better. So I've lined them up, and as always, we'll be back with some context.
I think that there have been a good amount of Democrats who have understood what this was, which was not only a repudiation of the Biden administration, which Vice President Harris is part of, but the way the Democratic Party has been doing business the last two cycles. And a lot of the lessons that should have been learned from Hillary Clinton's loss were not learned now. And the 2020 election was an aberration election because it was a COVID one. And I think that you're right, Judge, about this being leftover from COVID, but not about people thinking about lockdowns, but about inflation. That was one of the residues of all of this, and that telling people, well, now it's 2.5%, so you should be thankful for that, is not enough when their necessities still cost more. The 70% on the wrong track, those are on almost impossible threshold to surmount.
One thing I think that does really need to be said is that these repudiations of parties happen naturally and in cycles, and it doesn't mean that all is over. One of the funniest bits I personally take from Republicans trying to gloat about this already and brag and saying things like democracy won and it's been corrected is that Republicans have been losing everything since 2016, right? They lost in 2018, they lost in 2020, they lost in 2022, and lost in 2023 special elections as well. They lost so bad in 2020 that they cried fraud for the next 4 years. But the second they win, they want to act like they're crushing Democrats because they're the only ones who are right, and that America is pushing back on the Democratic nonsense. But, them losing the last 6 years wasn't them getting pushed back on their nonsense, right? They won this year in the same fashion that we won in 2020, in that in 2020, we took the Senate and the House and won the popular vote by 7 million. It's pretty similar to how Trump won this year. And the correlation is kind of to blame. So it's why I don't understand why in 2024, people will say things like, well, America just wanted to say Biden was bad and that's why we won. But then they will never say the same about the 2020 election, right? It was the correlation, again, where a lot of Trump losing in 2020, you could blame on his correlation with the pandemic that was going on. Now you can blame the Democrats' correlation of being in office when the brunt of the COVID effects hit, made it kind of an insurmountable hill to climb, even if Democrats didn't cause it, right? Americans still felt it. And at the end of the day, that's what mattered. I believe this probably would have stained either party that had to recover from it. COVID had its effects on both parties. Republicans probably would have won in 2020 if it wasn't for COVID. Democrats, all things considered that they did win, had the effects of COVID not been so wide-reaching, they probably would have won in 2024. Biden was the most legislatively effective president that we've had in my lifetime. All economic factors are at a level in which typically would lead to an incumbent party getting reelected. So again, I think COVID has affected both parties. I think it would have affected either one that was in office this time. It just sucks to happen now when Trump can come in and he can take credit for the recovery that Biden has caused. I guarantee not much economically will change, but Trump will be touting numbers similar to numbers we have now and be saying that, America is great and that he caused it and all of this. I personally just hope that this leads to Democrats running more on a platform that I agree with, that us leftists agree with, that younger voters agree with, right? More to the left, more to this economic populism, to the likes of like Bernie Sanders in 2016, instead of like not heeding their mistakes and trying to run more to the middle. That would be gross. I would probably never vote Democrat again if they did that. So I think this could be a turning point of sorts for Democrats. I really hope it is. And I believe it's a key part to bringing Democrats back to the level where, hey, Republicans are pretty much never going to win the popular vote in this country.
I've been thinking about this kind of in two buckets, that we had policy failures and we had personality failures. So policy failures, I think particularly on the cost of living, inflation, and especially on the border, and that there was never a good answer for that. And I'm not saying it would be impossible to have made the gap, certainly she would never have been on top, but we could have made the gap smaller on that by just being an honest broker about what happened. What was the rationale for pulling back a lot of Trump's executive actions and not doing anything?
Yep. One thing I will say about this is I think had Build Back Better passed rather than getting blocked by Manchin and Sinema, I think we'd be in a lot different boat in terms of what we were talking about and Americans were experiencing here. Another reason I think it's funny that people say, well, the Democrats rigged 2020 is because well, why didn't they just rig enough Senate seats to pass their major piece of legislation and Build Back Better? They also wanted to pass the Green New Deal. These were like pivotal pieces to Democrats at that time, but yet they can rig elections. And they did rig for Biden to win, but they didn't rig him enough seats to pass any of the things they wanted to. I mean, it literally makes no sense on his face. And then also it's like, well, did they just forget to rig it this time? And I digress. We don't have to litigate the absurdity of Republicans trying to claim that elections are rigged when they lost and then saying they're free and fair and that democracy wins out when they win. I think anyone can see the hypocrisy there. But the inability to pass the major parts that were in Build Back Better is what led to Biden fighting a consistently uphill battle in terms of recovery, and the successes of his legislation just don't stem the negative connotations of the economic field. That at the end of the day is something that everyone has to contend with. It doesn't matter that inflation is down now. It doesn't matter that wages have been above inflation for about 2 years. It doesn't matter that jobs were created at massive levels. The inflation happened, right? People felt that inflation, and the effects of that is what resonated with people, and first impressions are always going to be the hardest to shake. For immigration, however, I kind of disagree with what's being said here. I think Democrats should have fought as hard as Republicans to kind of be able to paint the narrative in the light that is true about immigration instead of ceding it to the fear mongering of Republicans, because the second that they ceded the ground and allowed Republicans to shift the narrative and instead they're just like trying to play ball or whatever it was, it made it an unwinnable battle for the left, even though we know, again, the right was just fear mongering and lying about it, which showed when they decided to play politics and not pass a bill about something they're pretending was this major issue, but allowing them to be the only ones creating the narrative created a sense that they were right about the border, which again just made this an unwinnable topic.
And on personality failures, there was a prison guard who was being interviewed this morning, voted Clinton, Biden, now Trump. Why? Well, I don't think that the party thinks good things about me. I don't think that the party thinks that I'm a decent person.
Yep.
And when you constantly harp on, and I am guilty of this myself, well, the college educated, well, what is that saying about everyone who doesn't have that kind of degree? And now it's not just white working class, and Bernie Sanders released a scathing statement about all of this, but it's now black working class and Latino working class.
It's just the working class.
Right.
That's right.
But it's, so lots to think about. I think it does, though, come down to 47% thought she was too progressive, while only 32% thought he was too conservative.
Don't get me wrong. I am positive her being a woman had a lot to do with it. The misogyny in America is super rampant. I mean, I can just see that if in an anecdotal sense from my channel, the comments that I get on videos of AOC, of women congresswomen, of Kamala Harris herself, right? Super misogynistic. It's always like, get back in the kitchen, this and this. Racism, still a huge problem, right? The fact that she's a black woman, hurts. There's plenty of people who won't vote for a woman to lead, let alone a black woman, right? But I think the union message falling out of the forefront of the platform is one of the biggest mistakes, right? When Kamala stepped in, it kind of wasn't pushed as much. Don't get me wrong. I do think that she did good talking about what she could do for workers, but I think for a lot of people, that union message is really what's powerful and moving more than, oh, I'll try this and I'll try this. And especially when the right can create misinformation about your policies and things like that, but they can't create misinformation about what people are feeling in real time in terms of the strength that unions gained under Biden and Harris, who secured major NLRB and union wins, right? It's something that Biden put at the forefront of his campaign, I think rightfully so. I mean, he walked the picket line, all of these things. And if you look at the Biden constituency, it's why he did so much better with white working class voters than Kamala did, whereas Kamala kind of dropped this union specific messaging for the opportunity economy message. It was a risk, didn't play out the way that you would have wanted it to see, but because it seemed not to resonate with working class voters the same way that Biden's did, right? I think banging into people's head the successes that you've achieved for unions, the benefits that unions cause even those who aren't in unions, contrast it with Trump's record on unions and for working class would have been a much smarter message probably. And again, all roads here point to Democrats needing to lean more into this economically populist messaging, which is a win for me. And I hope happens, as opposed to them trying to move further to the right. You've now seen Hillary and Kamala try that and both lost in pretty much the exact same way. Trying to win the middle isn't a winning strategy for Democrats. It's never really worked. I mean, it worked for Bill Clinton, kind of, really only worked for Bill Clinton because of Ross Perot anyway, but we don't have to litigate the 90s elections. But I don't know why ever since Clinton, they've tried to replicate reaching out to the middle rather than focusing on their base. I think that from here we can move on and go forward. Hopefully we focus on movements on the ground. We hope for growing awareness to issues that matters, the same issues that the right will never have an answer about or never talk about. And that way we can grow our constituency and do better in 2028.